Divide that by the number of kids with autism in the United States, and you find out she sold those kids out for $1.83 each, which makes her cheaper than a $2 whore.
You are living in the most dangerous time in American history.
We won't take a single back step.
Former professional basketball player is now the Republican Party's choice.
Can you imagine Royce White, the U.S. Senate?
White won the endorsement on May 18th with 67% of the vote.
There's nothing that guarantees we win, but I guarantee you if we lose, we will die. Welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and powered by our favorite sponsor, TireGet.com. That's TireGet.com. You have to buy tires from somebody, you might as well buy them from us and help fund the movement, help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you. Now, I'm your host, Royce White, here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and today we have another incredible family and friends guest, the great Chris Martenson, who is a very, very intelligent individual, wickedly brilliant, I would say, a scientist, a researcher, has a podcast, has a show, Peak Prosperity, that you all, website that you all should follow and visit if you get the chance. This is a guy who knows what's going on in the world. This is a guy who just doesn't have an opinion. He backs it up with facts, and he really dots his I's and crosses his T's, partially because this is what he provides his subscribers, but this is his life's work to give people good information. So you are about to get a distilled down version of the world at glance from somebody who is not bought and sold by the mainstream media, the establishment, the USAIDs of the world. A guy who's been doing it independently for a long time, and I'm happy to have him back on the show. I'm honored to have him back on the show. This is a guy that I would call, or a guy that I'll message and get his take on things because, one, I trust his integrity, but two, he's just a wealth of knowledge. So I hope you enjoy the show today. Again, without further ado, the great Chris Martenson. Welcome back, the great Chris Martenson, to Please Call Me Crazy, Family Edition. Haven't had you on the podcast for about a year and some change. You were one of the first guests in the early days of the Please Call Me Crazy podcast. We've gotten a much bigger audience since then. Obviously been able to expand the show back to X, which came after the turn of Elon Musk buying or acquiring Twitter and changing the name to X. So it's great to have you back on, Chris. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you, Royce. It's really good to be back with you. It's been too long.
Yeah.
How are we ever going to cover everything that we could possibly talk about?
Impossible. We need at least a 2-part series. I'm gonna bang on your door to convince you to come back on for a second part. But obviously a lot has changed since then, and a lot has been changing in recent weeks in the last month or so since the election. First, what's your overall take on the direction of where things are headed? Are you optimistic? Are you excited? What are you thinking in the opening weeks of this Donald Trump second term?
I'm giddy with excitement right now. And that's because, Royce, for the first time in my life, I think there's a path that actually could turn out okay. Every administration in my lifetime has just been worse and worse and worse and worse, right? We were just bombing random countries. People would lie and get us into wars for weapons of mass destruction. We had these bizarre things like 9/11, which just completely went uninvestigated, even though with your own lying eyes, you could see Building 7 fall. And we just all had to shrug and pretend like this was normal, and it wasn't. And so now, yeah, it's going to be painful. Obviously, it's going to be painful for all those thousands of people in the government who are now out of 200,000-400,000 jobs that somehow land them with $1 million bank accounts. I don't understand. So listen. This is, for the first time, we have a president and an assembled team around him who said, look, we're going to do the right things now. And so, for example, there's like Department of Education spends more per pupil than any other country, and we're 40 out of 40 on the list. So terrible results. Instead of, he's not going to do what politicians would do, which is like, let's assemble a bipartisan team and we'll yap about it and make some big reports. We'll nip at the edges. Nothing will happen. We'll spend more and bilk the taxpayer. He's like, why don't we just end this thing? It doesn't work. So we finally have business people in power, and they're going to see if we can run this a little bit more like a business. And that is exciting to me.
Yeah. First on the list I want to talk to you about is RFK, somebody who we both know, and I know you've worked with some. RFK got confirmed yesterday, so that was a huge win for the country, in my opinion. I think everybody would agree. I actually yesterday, Tina Smith, there was this huge clip that went viral, of Tina Smith grilling RFK about making the claim that antidepressants may or may not play a role in school shootings, which I took personal offense to because I was a huge mental health and anxiety, advocate in the earliest stages of my career as an athlete. And Tina Smith opted to not, run for re-election here in 2026. I am running for, United States Senate in 2026. I thought that would be my opponent. Now it won't be. The floodgates are open. You got Ilhan saying she may make a bid. You got Angie Craig saying she may make a bid. You got Tim Walz saying he may make a bid. But either way, it was somewhat ironic to have her basically pull out of her Senate seat on the day that RFK is confirmed after that brutal shilling she did for Big Pharma. And I know you're familiar with RFK. I know you're familiar with Big Pharma. What's your take on RFK getting confirmed? How do you feel about that?
This when I say I'm giddy, that's what I'm most giddy about. Listen, I worked closely behind the scenes. I've been working with the FLCCC docs, now rebranded to something called the Independent Medical Alliance, because, well, COVID's over, and that was a name that we adopted in the heat of battle. But now we're the Independent Medical Alliance, because here's what we learned during COVID, everything that RFK Jr. stands for, which is, wow, this system wasn't just corrupt, but it was immoral and it was evil. Right? And we should have known it at the time, right? Oh no, grandma's going to have to die all alone with her hand pressed against the glass because, it's too dangerous. We're going to have to put people on ventilators and remdesivir with an 85% kill rate, even though there's all these other doctors out here who have like 0.00% kill rates, with their alternative repurposed treatments. Everything that happened with ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, I was front and center of that battle, got the battle scars. I got canceled. I got deleted. It turned out there was a giant government program, not just directed at me, but anybody who had anything other than let's just kill people and give them these shots kind of a mentality. So obviously RFK is a man of intense integrity. I've met him a few times. My team at IMA works with him closely. And we have a lot of hope now that we're going to be able to get science back at the table, right? I get it. Politics has a seat, money has a seat, but they had the only two seats at this table for too long. When that science comes back in, let me tell you, so I'm not a forgive and forget kind of guy.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful that what we get here is we're going to need I really hope we get, here's my deepest hope, some kind of a Twitter files release of HHS documents. I want to know what they knew, when they knew it, to give us this results where we have so many kids today with autism, with chronic diseases, with metabolic disorders, with neurological disorders. I want to know. I'll bet you anything. We've got some data back there that's going to be really troubling. But you know what? RFK is the man for it. He's very smart, super high integrity, and they are outmatched. And for somebody like Tina Smith to come out and say, how dare you suggest that our blessed antidepressants are anything but an unqualified good? It's like, Tina, just read the package insert, right? It's got a black box warning, says right there, suicide ideation and violence is a rare side effect. Well, when you're giving something to 10 million people, rare is a few thousand things going bad, right?
I'll say this. Of all and not to say that she pulled out because of that comment, because certainly the Democrat Party and the mainstream media establishment is one that, or are many that believe they can say almost anything and still move forward with their agenda, right? They're able to troubleshoot or damage control any hiccup that they need to, especially from a politician who holds a position that they find important. I think Tina Smith's is further down the totem pole of importance to the DNC and that whole establishment. But you know, in an election or a midterm where the swing of the Senate may be is all usually important, but it's definitely going to be important this go around. For her to give up her Senate seat was kind of shocking. But I will say that is one of the most indictable comments I've heard a politician make. I don't want to make this out to be some bash Tina Smith because I'm running against her. I just personally feel it's lunacy for a politician who is so supported by medical and industry backers. For a politician who is so close to that industry to not know that there are black box labels on antidepressants, and she actually said that she had been taking them, that she had personal experience with them, which means either A, she's lying at a level so profound she should lose all credibility as a public person for a long time, or she really doesn't know that there are black box labels on these medications, and she took them, which is scary to say about her own mental health at this point. I mean, how, is there any way that she doesn't know that there are black box labels on antidepressants?
Well, like you said, if she does, then she's being duplicitous. And if she doesn't, she's displaying a level of ignorance that disqualifies her from a position of authority and leadership.
Right, right.
I mean, there's not too many ways to spin that.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I was shocked. As far as Big Pharma goes, and again, you worked at the FLCC, and they're continuing to do great work. The Independent Medical Alliance now, they are Big Pharma is still an issue that I think MAGA, America First, even the Trump administration has some hurdles to get over, to climb, because they fall into this, this sort of wedge area, you could say, between how we want free market capitalism to work and how we want to crack down on corruption. If it was you and the Independent Medical Alliance could really take a fine-tooth comb to Big Pharma, where would you start? What are some of the things that you've encountered over your years working in this field where Big Pharma has gone off the rails, so to speak? And can we do something about it and still be sort of Milton Friedman free market capitalists?
Yeah, this gets existential fairly quickly because, we have to go all the way back to a line from the Bible, which is, "For the love of money is the root of all evil." We have to look at how money just totally corrupted everything, the medical journals, the doctors, the hospitals, everything. But if we were going to peel this back, the way we would, put a stake, wooden stake right through the heart of this, is we just get back to actual science. We let the science have a seat at the table and we conduct actual science. So here's an example, right? So we watched this whole disgusting thing play out where the New York Times said RFK's lawyer wants sued to get the polio vaccine removed. It's like, well, no, RFK didn't do that. That was Aaron Siri, and RFK's worked with Aaron Siri, but he wasn't his lawyer for that. Aaron Siri is working for a different client, so the New York Times is just lying. Second, It wasn't to remove the polio vaccine. It was that we've been taking this oral vaccine for polio because it's an enteric virus, so that makes sense. You would administer a vaccine through the same route that you would actually get exposed. Okay, fine. So they had these few drops. They work great. Well, somehow they decided, oh, let's change that. We're going to turn it into an injectable formulation because they love stabbing kids with stuff, right? And of course, then it comes with aluminum adjuvants and maybe mercury, if it depends what formulation they're using, right? And so those are the ones that we're worried about. So they switch it away from this thing that's been working forever to this new injectable formulation. They put it into 147 kids and tracked them for 3 days and said, we're good. The suit was, no, we're not good. We don't know, like, you should track them for now for 10 years, or, you should look at it in thousands of. So that's not science. That was absolutely the opposite of science, right? Science is testable, repeatable, tracking across the duration, and you have statistically significant numbers. And the FDA approved that. So that was what the suit was about. So when I say, how do we fix this? We like, time out. We're going to conduct real science. And by the way, we have tons of data now we can go back through and compare. Like, we're just going to, here's science. Let's look at kids who've never been vaccinated. Let's call them Amish kids, right? We have a whole cohort of people there, but we can also find other ones. Doesn't have to be within a subculture like that, because maybe there's a genetic component that, queers the results. We can just compare unvaccinated to vaccinated people, which is what you should always do, and just say, how is this turning out, right? That's called post-marketing surveillance and epidemiology. So we did that with Vioxx, remember the Merck thing? And they came out with this new non-steroidal anti-inflammatory pain medication, and there were troubling signs that they ignored or hid in their clinical trials. They put it out on the market, killed 80,000 people. And next thing you know, it took years and years, but they finally figured that out and they pulled it off of the market. How? Because they actually looked at the results once it was in the market. So as soon as we start doing post-surveillance marketing, analysis and epidemiology, Royce, we're going to discover all kinds of things, such as what's the true rate of the black box, truly bad thing off of some of these antipsychotics and depressants. What are the actual results of the combination stacking function of having all of these vaccines given at this particular schedule? We'll know. We don't know, but we will know. And that's how I think we put a stake in the heart, because you know what we're going to find out at the end of all this? You're not going to out healthy the Amish, right? Sunlight, good food, exercise, and some sunlight, and get your vitamin D levels up. That's what we're going to find out, and we're going to get back to being healthy again. But let me be clear. I'm horrified that there are people out there who wanted us sick. They hid the results that their things were making us sick, both on the food side and then on the drug side to treat it.
Yeah.
And in the context of doing that, they found a bunch of willing participants. We'll call them Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Tina Smith. They found these horrible people who were willing to sell their souls for a few bucks so they could get reelected. I did the math. Liz Warren took $1.8 million from pharma, right? You divide that by the number of kids with autism in the United States, and you find out she sold those kids out for $1.83 each, which makes her cheaper than a $2 whore. And I know that's not very politic of me to say, but that you can feel the ire. That anger is about to be unleashed in America when we find out that it's okay to be angry about this stuff.
Yeah, righteous anger, righteous indignation. Yeah. And, I echo the sentiment. One of the people that we haven't mentioned yet is Dr. Fauci, who was obviously given a pardon from the Biden, an exiting Biden administration. Shocker. And, with this USAID scandal, you got people like Eli Crane, lancing the boil for figuring out how much pus is really in there. And you come to find out $241 million was spent on transgender animal experiments where they not only mutilated or, gave pumped hormones into animals to change their gender, but they also gave them drugs like sex drugs, ecstasy, to see how transitioned animals would be affected or differently affected by sex drugs. What do you make of? First, I know you were one of the big critics of Dr. Fauci when it wasn't popular, but what do you make of all of this funding, this granted funding that went to stuff like transgender research? And how do because I know you're not a lifelong conservative, you're not one of these right-wing conspiracy theorists like me. I'm a far right-wing conspiracy theorist, okay? But you're just more of a scientist, a genuine scientist and researcher. How do the Democrats going forward? How do the Democrats square a narrative that placed Dr. Fauci at the head of wellness and well-being and health? Now finding out that this much money, I mean, $241 million is a lot of money. Talk about Tina Smith, Elizabeth Warren getting $1.8 million from Big Pharma. $241 million is a lot of money to go to research that doesn't quantifiably have anything to do with the general health of the American people. I mean, how do they even square that going forward? Is there any scientific, any scientific value whatsoever to do transgender animal experiments.
No, Royce, come on. So I'm glad Eli Crane is lancing the boil and some pus is coming out, but under that, we're going to discover like the whole leg is gangrenous at this stage. It's really bad.
Yeah.
So by the time you have 241 million going to giving sex drugs to hamsters or whatever the story is, that's just tells you how far down this rabbit hole you've gone. So let's take it in chunks.
Okay.
First chunk. We have these people, I don't know what we call them. We call them leftists or progressives, but actually, let's be clear, they were totalitarian. They have very communist bents, and they. So here's the defining feature of all isms like that: totalitarianism, communism, socialism, is they have an ideology, and they demand fealty to that ideology. And the more crazy that ideology is, actually, the more power it has. So I learned that from Matthias Desmet talking about the rise of totalitarianism. And so they have these crazy things, right? And one of the crazy things is we have to have this genderless sort of society. There's 51 flavors of it. You just decide what it is. You swap it, it's interchangeable. In fact, we let kids decide. We chop off their, sexually mutilate them. And this is this is good. In their ideology, this is good. They never square it up and say, how many of these kids end up committing suicide or regretting their decision when they grow up a little bit? And the answer is an astonishingly, disturbingly high number of them. So they can't even point and say, look, this was great, at least for the individual involved. It was bad for the individual, but it was great for their ideology, because the more nonsensical that ideology is, again, the more power it has. That's who has been leading us. And by the time you have $200,000 feeding ecstasy to hamsters, it just tells you how long that ideology has been running. It's going to be hard to fix this, right? Because this has permeated our educational system. It's in our universities. Some of the craziest people you and I have probably seen over the past few years and today, just war garbling, like a flock of turkeys about, how dare Elon look into USAID? They didn't even know what it was last week, and now they're ready to kill somebody over it, because their ideology is about to get pierced. And deep down, they know it's nonsense too, but that terrifies them. So how are we going to fix our universities where 90% of the professors were raised within a system that promoted this ideology? It's their entire identity. It's not like they can just wake up one day and go, wow, that was stupid. Let me fix myself, right? It's not going to happen.
Right.
So we have a problem. And the only way we're going to get to that is first with the bright light of discovery. And that's what we're undergoing right now. It's painful. A lot of people are going to lose jobs. I can't guarantee this isn't going to have some wild economic, perturbations and disturbances, because the flows of graft are suddenly going to be, terminated. So It's weird. So that's one area. Is like, yes, as we find these things, when you hear about sex change in hamster kind of studies, just know that that's the literal proverbial tip of the iceberg. And it speaks to a deeper structural problem that allowed it to get that far. The second piece, Fauci's easy. That guy is a mass murdering psychopath. Anybody who's familiar with his work during the AIDS epidemic knows just how bad he is. How he stayed in power after that, I don't know. How he was allowed to have any authority and voice, I don't know. Why CNN keeps having John Brennan and John Bolton on, I don't know, right? But that's what's coming apart right now, and it had to. And I'm really glad for it, even though I know this could get turbulent.
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of questions to be answered about how we got to this place, and I want to make a pivot if we can. On the show before, when we had you on before, we talked about geopolitics. I know you are very well versed in geopolitics and how everything's kind of moving and the pieces fit together. Especially around energy and the questions around energy, the questions around technology and energy. So I want to get into that. But first, before we go there, talking about, kind of that system, that deeper system, I call it the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. And you get the liberal order, the international rules-based order. Eric Weinstein had a great clip. I remember when I called you up when I saw it from a podcast. I think it's called Modern Wisdom, and he basically talked about the load-bearing walls of our global structure and society not wanting to be disturbed by what he described as primaries, and them pruning political primary elections process by stripping the populist candidates out. Donald Trump being one too big to do so, I guess you could say. But the post-World War II Democrat liberal order and what Donald Trump is doing in these earliest days of his second term, and when it comes to the geopolitics, how do you feel about that? Is this something that you're comfortable with as well? Are you excited? Are you just as excited about what he's doing on the international stage as you are about some of the things that are happening here domestically?
I do, it's still a little bit of a mixed bag, but hey, it's only been 3 weeks, right? Um,
Right, right.
but let me score those first 3 weeks with like a solid B plus right now. I'm super excited that he picked up the phone, called Putin, said, let's end this madness in Ukraine, right? And I'm very happy about that because I think war is wasteful. It's terrible. The million people who died on the Ukrainian side and who knows how many on the Russian side, just unnecessary, tragic losses. Obviously, if we had the time, I would take us back to 2013 and 14 because I understand the whole context of that whole thing. Notwithstanding the people who show up with a Ukrainian flag on Twitter and say, crazy, stupid things that demand war.
Also
Uh,
don't know where Ukraine is. Couldn't point it out on the map probably.
Yeah, and don't know
Yeah,
what a Stepan Bandera is or,
that's right.
any of that stuff, right? They just don't, they have no context. We have a lot of context-free people. And so leaving them aside, what we've seen is that Trump says, hey, let's just call Putin up, has a conversation. Lavrov comes out the next day, says, now that's how you speak to Russians. We can deal with this person. It's going to be a complicated negotiation, but watch what happened. NATO is just unbelievably upset. Oh no, Vindman is terrified. Oh, he's a Putin apologist. All these people who are just making money off of death and misery are very unhappy. But last night, I don't know if you caught this, somebody flew a drone into the containment dome over the Chernobyl sarcophagus, right, of that reactor. And immediately Zelensky came out and said, oh, look what Russia did. I'm like, dude, if Russia wanted to bomb the sarcophagus, it wouldn't have been one stupid drone. They would have used planes. But second of all, that was a false flag attack, obviously. This is just Zelensky desperately trying to get like some more money. Oh, look how bad Russia is. They're bombing the containment dome. Like, that's how stupid it's become.
Yeah.
And I think that's a crime against humanity, by the way. And I think that Zelensky and his whole crew ought to be prosecuted. In fact, I think everybody who was involved in getting that war kicked off should be prosecuted. I'm talking Victoria Nuland. I am talking Vindman. I'm talking all of these neocons. That's the other boil.
How about Bill Kristol, who was getting money from
100%.
USAID? He's
100%.
actually getting paid by the government. This is state-sponsored media and warmongering. I think if nothing else, what troubles me the most when we get through Lansing the Boyle with USAID and all these other programs is how much of it was this neocon warmongering propaganda. I mean, that really should be prosecuted. If the medical stuff, for sure, but also the warmongering stuff is not only thievery, it's real, stealing con work, but we lost lives. And anybody who doesn't, realize that we have troops and operators that are in all of these places right now in harm's way and are in some cases injured by what some of these people have been saying. I mean, it's crazy. They'll say a Chris Martenson is, a danger to public health, the disinformation, misinformation, and medical misinformation he's spewing online. And then you got Bill Kristol telling the American people we should be in this war. He's getting paid under the table, or really over the table, by a government program, and young people are dying from it. And everybody goes radio silent like this is necessary. I mean, what do you make of the just from a historical standpoint, is your theory the case more in alignment with what the Russians have been saying? And look, I've said for a long time, you can't trust the Russians per se, but who can you trust? But they're the recant of history, recent history, even Putin on Tucker Carlson, I thought was spot on from a historical standpoint in terms of how, things played out between us and Russia post World War, the World Wars, and even going back to the history of Ukraine. Kyiv was the capital of the Russian Empire. I mean, it would be like if, let's say, Florida decided, hey, we want to secede from the union.
We're
Okay.
going back to Spain.
Yeah, we're out of here. And then all of a sudden, the Floridians, and I'm using them because it's a MAGA state, right? So I think
Mhm.
it's safe to use them. I'm not picking out California or, Oregon. But the Floridians decide anybody who identifies with America or speaks English, right? Speaks Americana English, American slang, we're going to persecute you. We're going to sort of bully you, or we're even going to have a sort of, ground floor kind of grassroots gang war against more American and national people that still live in Florida. And then America came back in, we, the union, came back in and said, you know what? We're sick of this, Florida. You're not going to treat these people this way. And just as a general principle, we don't like that the Chinese have put so much of a stronghold there in Tallahassee. We don't like their, missiles that they got standing in Tallahassee. And then Russia came over and said, you don't get to do that to Florida. You don't get to take Florida back. What? What world do you get a say in it? You know what I mean? I mean, that is essentially what we've done there in Ukraine and Russia. Do I got my history right? Do you think that's a reasonable example, or am I crazy? I don't know.
No, it's totally right. And of course, the best interviews on this, of course, would be somebody like Jeffrey Sachs with Tucker, because he'll rewind the story. Like this is one of the things I really deplore about my country, is that we present these things context free. New York Times, Washington Post, like, oh no, Putin's a bad man. He attacked a country. But then Tucker goes over and talks with Putin, and Putin's like, let me rewind to 1358 or some, he goes back hundreds of years, right?
Yeah.
And then you find out there's a long, complicated history. And in fact, Putin's point, I thought, was very well taken. I admired it, actually, where he said, look, we've done the ultra nationalist thing before, and it really kind of sucked. All right. And that was World War II. And we have this longstanding right that was enshrined in the post World War II era, which was, if Nazism ever rises again on our borders, we get to deal with it. All right. So just like you say, there was this Maidan revolution, and with CIA all over it, with Lindsey Graham and John McCain flying in, and
Klobuchar.
yeah, oh yeah, that's right, and Chris Murphy from Connecticut, and
Yeah.
Victoria Nuland, this whole swampy creature crowd shows up and says, yeah, let's get, we'll get a war on with Russia, because they thought that was a good idea. All right, that's 2013-14. Then from 2014 to 2022, we find out through international monitoring for the OSCE, that's out of Europe, right? They had monitors at this borderline between the Donbass eastern provinces and the rest of Ukraine. 14,000 civilian deaths caused by shelling and bombings and shootings by Ukrainians against these people in the east, right? That's a lot. And it was gross, right? You read the reports, and it was like they would wait for people to line up at a farmer's market and drop arty on them. It was nasty. Can you imagine 14,000, right? So then, remember Putin's unprovoked attack in February of 2022. There were like 30, 40, 50 of these cross-border shellings and attacks and all of that, mostly one way from the east, bombing the western bombing the eastern provinces, right? So Ukraine bombing their own people, allegedly, but they're Russian speaking, like you said in your metaphor.
Yeah.
So then we come up in a day, and all of a sudden we wake up one day and there's 500 of these events. And then the next day there's 900. And then there's 1,800 cross-border shellings, right? And that's when Biden comes out, his handlers said, hey, go out and say this. And he says, oh, I predict that there's going to be an incursion, that Russia's going to attack. And then there's 2,100. And then there's 2,400 shellings, 2,400. Can you imagine, like, where you live? Hundreds and hundreds of arty rounds coming in from Canada, say. And all of a sudden, our president says that's enough, right? And attacks. And then the whole world goes, oh, look at this unprovoked attack, right? It was clearly stupid. Anybody who can track these things as a slight bit of context says, no, that was totally a provoked attack. Completely, 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at. Now, more context for this is, I went down with Michael Yon, and I went into the Darien Gap because he wanted to show me where these people are coming out of the jungle. And, we did that when the flows of migrants were enormous. And he took us to what he called China Camp, which is this deep, 4 hours up a dugout with a dugout canoe up a river, macaws and caimans and stuff, actual Umbrera Indians. It was a cool trip. We get out into this place, and all of a sudden there's a camp, there's a generator, there's Wi-Fi, and there's Chinese dudes walking out of the jungle with better clothes than you and I have ever had. Like, I'm talking like Gucci backpacks and, really great footwear and all this stuff. And they told us that in 10 days, they were going to be in New York with a driver's license, right? So I'm watching all this happen and like, this is crazy. How is this happening? Well, in the context of that trip, I found out that China's all over the place in Central and South America. And you know how they roll? They come in El Salvador, they built this beautiful, gleaming, very high-tech library in the capital. And then in Colombia, they're building bridges and roads. And that's how China rolls. And that's a type of diplomacy. And where I'm going with this, Royce, is this idea that because of the Newlands and the Vindmans and the Crystals and these neocons, the United States diplomacy is really nasty. We come in with a lecture, we get your country in debt, we demand that you give us your resources. If you don't do that, we send the jackals in. This is all John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman sort of methodology. We'll assassinate you. If that doesn't work, we'll do a color revolution. If that doesn't work, then we finally send the Marines in, right? That's been our shtick. Well, it finds out when I'm talking with people in these countries, they're like, dude, we so much more appreciate the library than being assassinated. It's crazy. So we've had this really toxic foreign diplomacy, it's sort of Kissingerian, which is like might makes right. We're either killing you or you're killing us. And that's how I think our diplomacy has been. Diplomacy is gone, and it turns out it's not popular and people don't like it. And that's another boil that needed to be lanced, which was like, what if instead we lived in a country where we did spend billions and trillions, but at the end of that, other countries had improved health, they had bridges, they had clean water, like stuff they would actually appreciate. It would be such a different landscape. And I think that's what Trump, when you ask geopolitically, what is he trying to do? Yeah. He's trying to come back in and say, I would rather have a negotiation where you get something and we get something, and that's it. And he started that with Putin, and you can see already all of these horrible monsters, these immoral people who just prefer might makes right. We just want to bring the death highways, to these countries. We like that model. And Trump is putting that at risk, and they are angry. And I don't know what they're going to do next, but it's kind of how I see it right now.
Well, they're the most dangerous and formidable force, right? The warmongering neocon echelon of the American political elite or the Western political elite. These people are nasty, and they will kill you. Staying on where we are right now, what do you say about what some would describe as an American expansion in this regard? Is not just trading with some of these countries in cases like Mexico and Canada and Greenland. Are you in favor? I am, first and foremost, of potentially annexing Mexico and Canada and acquiring a place like Greenland, or having a much stronger presence in a Panama, or kind of expanding America's borders. This is a sort of catch-22, because people will say, oh, Royce, you're the biggest anti-globalist. Isn't it globalism for America to go? And I say, it's actually not, if you understand the history of how this thing has been structured and what it's going to take in terms of extreme measures to get us back to some place of sanity where American citizens and citizenship and America is strong in what is becoming a multipolar world. And it's going to be a multipolar world. And there's no doubt about it. The Russians got hypersonic missiles. They're just kind of playing coy with us the whole time. And I think last time you were on the podcast, you were one of the first people to say what Pete Hegseth, Secretary of the Department of Defense, what he said on Sean Ryan's show is this whole aircraft carrier power projection platform is a problem. This is going to be this is coming to an end. So we got to really think about how we're even standing out here in the world in terms of military and national security. Well, what do you make of the Mexico, Canada, Greenland, Panama Canal American expansion, so to speak?
Well, this is a really unusual period of human history. And this now we have to turn to resources for a second.
Yeah.
We went from, practically, a few million people on the planet to 8.5 billion. And our standard of living, our prosperity all comes from the resources of the planet. And we are no longer at that place where there's just infinite, goo in the center of the earth we can take out and make things out of. So I think we have to understand it's now a multipolar world. China is clearly a force to be reckoned with. Not just that, but we have to compromise. Like China's going to have its sphere of influence, and we're going to have ours. And I think we're stronger as a North American. Like we have to manage ourselves as a block now, right? And that includes North America includes Mexico and Canada, right? And
Right.
maybe Greenland's over there. Who knows? And of course, trade is really important. The Panama Canal is vital to that at present because it's critical. There are other choke points, right? The Suez Canal, right? The Straits of Malacca, points like that. But China, I should point out, can walk to the Middle East. We have to sail over there. And as you mentioned, like the whole idea of a navy, it's over, right? These hypersonic missiles have shown that. Even if they haven't shown that, swarm drone attacks have shown that. It's a whole new world. And I just don't think boats play in that as strongly as people who can actually walk there or take a train or
And
something like that.
this is Mackinder's land theory, right? I mean, this is not
Mhm.
new stuff. This was Halford John Mackinder back in 1907, I think, telling the British Empire, telling the Crown, hey, warfare is going to change. Technology is going to change the way that the British Empire, then a very strong naval
Mhm.
empire, can operate. And what Great Britain's reaction was something like, okay, we'll be on both sides of every war then. That's how we'll kind of insulate ourselves from the
Mhm.
changing ways that war is fought. And then you got Germany, who is kind of onto the shtick. I'm not defending Germany's role in any of the world wars. I'm just saying that Germany is kind of like the little brother of Great Britain ideologically, right? I mean, all of their academic tradition stemmed from Darwinism and Galton's, Sir Galton, and then all of a sudden you get like social Darwinism, and then it's like white superiority, Aryan, superiority, right? But and they even had an affection for Great Britain, right? So I mean, but this stuff this has been the operating theory of our academic elites from here to Cambridge since the early 1900s, right?
Well, what you've exposed there is actually both the power for good and bad of ideas, right?
Yeah,
Ideas are really important. And what I'm very worried about, particularly for Europe, is they've been caught up with this mind virus. So if we chase this back, you have to go back to like early 1800s France. I don't know, somebody thought up the socialist mind virus, right? And it took off and it created misery everywhere it went. And now Europe is actually just caught up in it. I feel really bad, right? A lot of European friends, but what's going on in Germany is just awful. It's just the mind virus has caused them to immiserate themselves, right? They closed their nuclear plants down. They went to war with their gas supplier, without a plan. And energy is the lifeblood of an economy. I mean, we've been swimming in it so long. A lot of people don't know about that, but that's my work in the world. When you take something called the crash course, I put energy, economy, environment in one spot because we have to see how they relate to each other. Energy is all capital letters, capital the master resource. And if you want to understand, why did this place blow up and what happened here and look at this conflict, and then you map gas pipelines on top of that and oil flows, it's a perfect match, right? You know, and
Mm.
so we've always cared about it. Anybody who thinks about it, you can read. There's this beautiful 1956 speech to a bunch of doctors by Admiral Hyman Rickover, and he explains this perfectly. And if he's talking about it in 1957, trust me, this is now a matter of deep policy because everybody understands energy is the master resource. Hop, skip, and a jump. China is acting overtly as if they understand that. We're not quite up that curve yet as a country. I think we've kind of lost the plot line there, but Europe is now, we can just look at Europe and go, Germany's industrial production, baseline to 2017, Royce, is down 23%. It was not even down that far during the Great Depression. They are it's like, you ever see that video or the GIF where somebody throws a brick into a washing machine and undergoes spontaneous self-disassembly, to put it nicely. Germany's doing that right now, and they can't get out of their own way. They can't somehow detect that that's happening because they have this mind virus. It's like I'm listening to like the San Francisco City Council going, why do we have all this shoplifting? We raised the shoplifting limit to $950. We don't understand. Like, they can't connect reality with the ideas. I don't know. To me, that's the progressive mind virus, that disconnect of here's what we thought up and here's what actually happened. And we don't see how they connect to each other. Yeah. Wow, these kids are miserable after we chop their breasts off. I don't understand it, but that's the great
isn't
battle.
That what they said they wanted? Right? I mean, that's kind of that's the problem with it, is they believe whatever a person so too shall want, they shall have, right? Anything goes, do as thou wilt. It's a very faithless doctrine at bottom, which is why the extraction of religion and faith from the society and culture is so detrimental. Staying on energy, what is your prediction of what Donald Trump can do? Like, for example, let's say all things fair, we have to continue to be an oil-based society for some time, but America has to reorient itself away from the Kissingerian petrodollar, Middle Eastern dependency. Is there enough oil in the North American, Central American, South American, the Western Hemisphere for us to make a transition to something else? And in that race, does China overrun us because of their proximity to the Middle East?
That's a great question. I think there is, not in the United States as a single entity, though. So I'm glad you expanded the borders a little bit. Canada has extraordinary resources through all the Athabasca tar sands up there and all of that. It's hard to get out. It's very capital intensive, but it's there. Similarly, down in Venezuela, they've also got some really goopy, really nasty, heavy stuff, but huge amounts of it. Again, it's going to take enormous capital to get that out. Mexico's flagging a little bit. Here's the surprise I don't think Trump has quite caught on to yet. He's pretty good at a lot of things, but I'm hoping Chris Wright, the new energy secretary, can bring him up the curve. And I have hopes because Chris Wright's been in the biz. Most people aren't aware of this, but the shale plays in the U.S., which has been our most recent burst of activity, is over at this point, right? So we could do it. I could take you down basin by basin, but let's just say we're not going to have 5 million more barrels coming out of that. So the drill, baby, drill, it's not going to work. The only thing that's going to make more oil come out of the ground is the same thing that it's always been true. It needs a higher price. We're getting everything we can get out of the ground right now at this price, and it's starting to roll over. And if we want another burst, I don't know how much Trump could really do to relieve regulations, which is something you could do at the federal level that would be the equivalent of making oil worth more on a per barrel basis without the price of it going up. But that's not sufficient, I don't think, at this point. So I don't think anybody's ready for that quite, insight at this point in time. Yeah. I do interviews with people who understand this a lot better than I do. But if we take that at face value, then the second part of your question is actually the right one. And this is where I'm also excited by the new energy secretary, Chris Wright, because he actually serves on, I don't know if he had to give this up, on the board of a company called Oklo, which makes small modular nuclear reactors. That's our future. We're going to have to turn nuclear big time. Not those big, giant, ugly, multi-billion-dollar things, based on the boiling water. None of that. This is fourth-gen stuff, salt reactors, exceedingly safe compared to the old designs, super efficient, right? They don't burn 0.5% of the mass. Some of them burn 99.5% of the nuclear material. Tons of output. That'll be great. But man, we're going to have to get on that. And, I would have one of those reactors in my backyard, I would be yes, we need to go down this path. There are things we can do, but for the first time, we actually have people in power who might do the right things for the right reasons.
Right.
Yeah. And that's exciting. I don't know if we will, but we have the chance now. That's kind of exciting, really.
I got another question for you in the same vein. Is let's go China for a moment. I said on the podcast and on the show a week back, a couple of weeks, or the last couple of weekends actually, that the the crossroads we're sort of at here, and the collision course we're kind of on with China is an interesting one that's both sort of philosophical but deeply spiritual, in that the justification for us to move forward and advance for technology, in this particular instance, I'm talking AI, has always been, if we don't do it, they're going to do it. If we let them do it, we'll be at a disadvantage and we'll have real security issues.
Hmm.
Speaking about AI for a moment, and the dangers. Let's say we saw the drone situation pop up in Jersey, and we had the weather balloon situation happen not too long ago here in this country, and we know that China's doing significant things in terms of artificial intelligence and drone technology and all of that jazz. Um, Morally, ethically, if you had to put constraints on how far we should go with artificial intelligence in pursuit of national security, where would you draw that line, if at all? And can America still win? Let's say in both scenarios, if America says, you know what, this AI thing is too anti human, it's too dangerous, it's too beyond our wisdom, we need to do a more dramatic halt on artificial intelligence from a public policy and government standpoint,
Hmm.
can we still compete with the Chinese long term? Can we still hold our place? And then, secondly, if we decide to go forward, but with ease, will the Chinese just overrun us? Will the CCP overrun us in that instance?
Yeah, this is a tough one. AI is that cat's out of the bag. It's here, and so the question now is how are we going to manage that?
Hmm.
And in the space, people are worried about what they call the digital canyon, meaning that the first country that achieves what they call AGI, which is some sort of like super sentience or something, it's poorly defined, so don't ask me to define it because they don't even define it well. But here's the idea that AI will achieve a level of proficiency that once it achieves that level of proficiency, the country that gets there first kind of wins everything because nobody can catch up because AI improves itself at the speed of silica, right? It's a very fast evolutionary process. So I think that was sort of the national security, sort of the fear-based, like we have to do this. You saw Sam Altman come out, not with that glitzy roadshow where they were going to make mRNA cancer vaccines with Ellison and so on. No, earlier he said we need 5 gigawatt data centers just to begin to keep going here. And when you look at that, like 5 gigawatts, you can run a city of 3 million people on a 5 gigawatt. I mean, so he's talking about basically we need like 6 new American mega cities, right? It's like, what? And where's that power going to come from?
Right.
And that was then, though, that was like 6, 8 months ago. Now we had the DeepSeek release out of China, which showed, oh, you can be more clever and you can do this at a much more efficient scale. That's great. All that means, though, is that we're going to get more AI, not less. It's not like, oh, it's more efficient. Now we're going to use less power. We're actually going to use more because now it's going to be in everything and all of that. Now, is this a good thing or a bad thing? The answer is, well, yes. And it kind of depends how it gets deployed. So I was super happy to see the DeepSeek people not only kick OpenAI's butt, but they made it all open source, which means that anybody can get in there and see how it's being run and all of that. That is our only path through AI that makes sense to me, is where it's all open and transparent. And this now is what actually Elon is doing. They came into, like, say, USAID or the US Treasury Department, labyrinthian. Some of these are on mainframes, probably still coded in some 1960s language like COBOL or something, whatever. And it's impenetrable, and there's no way to possibly figure this out, but they put their AI tools on top of it, and these things do pattern recognition and structuring exceedingly well. And they found stuff that would have taken PricewaterhouseCooper forensic accountants, I don't know, a decade and $10 billion, and they figured it out in a weekend with some 20-year-old guys. So that's the promise of AI. What does that mean, though? Well, think about government for a second. Government itself is basically 2.2 million people taking whatever laws Congress passes, interpreting those through agencies, turning those into rules, and then making sure those rules get run, right? Which is paperwork and forms and processes. All of that can be replaced by AI. So That's hugely deflationary. We're going to find out, and this is independent of any other conversation we're going to have, whether it's China, US, who wins, who loses.
Right.
AI is going to displace people who have basically automatable jobs. Now, under the infinite wisdom of Bill Clinton under NAFTA, the United States said, hey, we'll let the rest of the world manufacture stuff. We'll sort of be the service economy. And we went to a 70% now service economy, which is just, that's a fancy way of saying we walk each other's dogs and do each other's taxes and stuff. Except for the dog walking and maybe that with robots, it's all replaceable. And so now we have to have a more fundamental question, which is, well, who are we and what do we do? Right. And Trump is saying, let's get the manufacturing back home. Right. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And let's start to think about ourselves as a North American bloc with a sum total of resources and energy. And that makes a lot of sense. And that's the level this conversation has to be had at. And along the way, if we don't have a vision for where we want to be in 30 years with our energy infrastructure, we're going to end up like Germany, and we're going to be full of regret and really unhappy with ourselves. And AI is just sort of an overlay on that that's going to be just destroying jobs by the millions that frankly needed to be displaced.
Yeah. What last, and since we're talking AI, we're kind of working our way up the technology totem pole here, nuclear energy and whatnot. What do you make of where we've come to with the UAP and the drone slash alien phenomenon? I mean, where are you at? I mean, you're as somebody I would trust as much as anybody to give a take on. What do you think it is? What do you think it is? What do you think the implications are? I mean, there's something in here that plays on my fear, and I guess you just could say that I'm a conspiracy theorist, and we know there's a shadow government. I mean, that much is pretty much clear. You'd call it the deep state, but they're not so deep, right? I mean, you see USAID basically funding the New York Times to give headlines as they would like. It's not really that deep of a deep state. It's kind of like right on the surface, but there does seem to be something sort of well hidden, unspoken going on where part of me believes that some of these politicians' behaviors, such as a Tina Smith that would, kind of fleece the American public about black box labels, or even a Lindsey Graham is there in the Ukraine, there's something that seems to be going on that has something to do with something other than any of us really can see. And part of me just kind of gets the sense that there is some other force out there that's pulling the strings, and I don't mean, giving direct orders, but sort of that there's another threat out there that these people, and I don't want to give these people this excuse because, again, most of it is greed and just, power-hungry, warmongering psychopaths. But if that is the case, if there is another, intelligent life form or a set of intelligent life forms, colonies, of intelligent life forms out there, and they've been coming here for a long time, and the alien narrative is true, and they're kind of pulling the strings. Do you get the sense that some of this has something to do with that from where you're sitting? Is that a real possibility in your sense? And if not, what is it? What are we looking at? Are we looking at just government replicas? I mean, some of this technology is so out there. It almost, if it's not alien life forms or extraterrestrial, it almost starts to indict our politicians even further that this type of technology has been suppressed from the public because it would have obviously made energy, one of the things, energy or electricity at least, so much cheaper and more efficient. So which one are we looking at here?
This is a complicated thing. So let me start with some, let's just see if we can claim the territory piece by piece.
Okay.
First, we had the whole New Jersey drone thing, right? You could see some of those, they were just drones, right? They were clearly designed to be seen. They were lit up like Christmas trees and you could hear the rotors on them, nothing fancy. So I can't claim that all of those, but I saw enough to say those are identifiable technology. We know what that is. Second, we know that those were used by the Biden administration as a psyop, right? Oh, we don't know what those are, but we know they're not dangerous, right? And state officials were kept in the dark, all of that. So we know that they use these things as psyops. Now let's rewind a little bit. 2017, we had our first sort of like New York Times, the Tic Tac video came out. The Navy just decided to release this stuff, but they also released some bogus videos at the same time. They had one that looked like a little green pyramid, and that's the bokeh effect from how you have an out of focus, imaging tube, right? And so the Navy knows that. So now I know the Navy is either, giving us a limited hangout, right? They're telling us, oh, here's some stuff that's real, and here's some stuff that's complete bunk. So they're trying to confuse us. But so what's that all about? Okay, let's parse that. They're just lying to us, or this is how you would go about releasing stuff if you know it's going to be sort of existential, mind-bending stuff, and you need people to begin to get slowly prepared for this. You would release these things carefully over time.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went away. And then in 2018, we had some congressional hearings. And then in 2019, we had this guy come out and say, I was the director of some extra intelligent, alien project, and I saw things. And then it all got captured for me when I heard Eric Weinstein, who you mentioned. He said, it's the manana problem, right? You get your Stephen Greers, you have all these people that are like, tomorrow, we're going to release this amazing information. And it never comes out, right?
Yeah.
So I'm getting very suspicious that I'm a scientist, like you said. Show me something. Show it to me. Like, let's demonstrate this. Like, let's have a physical look at this stuff. But every day it's like manana. Tomorrow, this is all going to get put out. So part of this is PSYOP. Part of it might be carefully constructed PSYOP to release information in such a way that the world doesn't wake up one day shocked to find out we're not all by ourselves in the universe. Looking at this from
Would
another
that shock
dimension.
you? Would that shock you to find out that we're not all alone in the universe?
No, absolutely not. Statistically, It's impossible that we're alone.
But would you also, in the same sense, say, well, if we are many in the universe, why would people come here? I mean, I think we kind of have this human self-absorption where we go, well, why wouldn't people want to come here to see Earth? We're so amazing. It's like,
yeah.
To us we are, but maybe to them, or probably to them, especially if they could travel here, there's probably a lot cooler places to travel that have a lot more to offer. I mean, just quite frankly, maybe not. You're more, that maybe seems anti-Christian to me, because Christians kind of tend to be the ones who would have, what's going on here at the center of things in the universe.
Yeah.
And maybe there is some truth to that too. So maybe that is why, if these life forms are out there, they're coming here.
You know what it is?
Go ahead.
It's like humans think like, oh yeah, aliens are going to come here because we're all that, and a box of cookies. We're that amazing. So we think that like in the intergalactic area, we're Club Med.
Yeah.
But it probably we're just that big frying pan on I-40. Some people come and visit that, maybe. But I'm really suspicious that all of these aliens decided they had to visit the U.S. Like, why is that the case? Like, why wouldn't they visit Malawi or, it's always the U.S. So I think we probably have some technology that we haven't talked about that we've been developing at great expense. And it's probably pretty cool. My suspicion is that this technology, if released, would actually do something really unthinkably bad, which is give people freedom, right? Because if we had free energy, or basically really cheap energy, that gives people their freedom. My whole system I grew up in, you look at our debt-based money, you look at taxes, you look at all of it's designed to keep a leash around me, right? And that's how we've developed as a species over time. And I think that what we're talking about potentially is what would happen if we had a disruptive technology that would give people their freedom back. The Noah Yuval Hararis of the world, dude, we're just useless eaters. They have no interest in having us be free.
Right. No, that's, and a huge part of me, the kid in me, right? The kid that loves Star Wars and Power Rangers and intergalactic space wars and all of that stuff would like to believe that there's extraterrestrial out there and that there's some strange combination of, my Christian faith and an even bigger, broader world, the universe that God has his hand in, its life and consciousness. The child in me would like to believe that. The realist in me thinks people in government and these multinational corporations are much more further along in technology than we realize, and that this technology is being suppressed intentionally for economic and political power reasons. And that may be, in the end, one of the biggest crimes against humanity in history is
Hmm.
all of the people and their lives, their quality of life, their standard of life. I mean, even medicine and hospitals and all of the things that could be done with unlimited energy. I mean, the list is almost infinite. So your theory of the case is we're probably, but the question I have then is, we're talking anti-gravity, we're talking, electromagnetic propulsion and
Something.
and you think that you're leaning more towards that. But every country, see, this is where I have trouble with it. Okay, let's just take the three major countries, right? Us, Russia, China. All three countries, nobody's said we're gonna press play and go forward with this. If they have it, if we have it, they probably have it. Or do you say you think only the United States has it, or Western, let's say Western,
No,
Five Eyes?
no, you've put your finger on the exact pulse of the problem as I see it. So I get this all the time, Royce. People like, oh, Tesla figured this out and it got suppressed because the FBI stole all his documents. Now they may have, but if Tesla could figure this out, basically 100 years ago, somebody in India would have figured it out by now. Somebody in Russia would have figured it out, and somebody in China would have figured it out. And by the way, they all would have had to conspire and said, let's just keep this under wraps, this free energy stuff. Meanwhile, China is currently putting in nuclear plants, coal-fired plants. They're putting in wind towers, solar as side niche components, which is appropriate. They're now building a dam system that's going to be 3 times larger than the Three Gorges Dam, right? I don't think they'd be doing all of that if they're just like, oh yeah, we're just keeping this stuff under wraps to, to psyop, just to punk humanity for a little longer.
Right,
Anybody
right,
who brings that out first wins against their
right.
nation state peers. And so now we have to say, oh, they're all in on it. And I can't get there
It's tough.
because somebody else would have figured it out by now and brought it out. Like we
It's
would have
tough.
seen it.
It's tough and it's scary. It's tough and it's scary. One of the things that made me at least consider it though was in the height of this Russia America conflict, where you literally had the Kremlin and Russia saying, "Hey, here's our red line. You guys are crossing it. We'll nuke you, motherfuckers, if you keep playing around." But yet and still, our space programs were working together, right? And it's
Hmm.
kind of like space. If lower orbit space is going to be the sort of final frontier of what would be nuclear exchange, with these Damocles missiles and whatnot, then why on the brink of nuclear war would Russia and the United States still have cooperation? It made it seem like there is some level of coordination between the superpowers that transcends the sort of WWE politics happening on the surface. But you're right. I still can't get there. I mean, it's speculation at this point. Your last question for you is, and we'll bring you back. You got to we'll look some more into this hidden technology, because that's going to be probably the most groundbreaking thing in the history of humanity. If it turns out to be they're suppressing technology, the United States government is. Heads should really roll. We should put some heads up on a pike as
Hmm.
a symbol of genuine corruption. Then, but last question I'll ask you is, if you got your magic wand and you could do a couple of things to the education in this country, given that you're a very educated person on a number of issues, a number of topics, and as a scientist, what would you do to education in this country? What's your first couple of steps? How would you reshape it so America has a fighting chance?
This is so I love this one statement by Warren Buffett's right-hand man, Charlie Munger, who passed last year. He said, "You show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome." It's so true. So you mentioned heads on a pike. That's a form of incentive or disincentive, right? We haven't had consequences. We haven't had incentives. We've sort of been living on the fat of all these fossil fuels, and people, that whole arc where, hard men create good times and good times create weak men and weak men create hard times. And we're kind of at that part of the story. So I believe in competition. Nature, all of nature, God's law, right? You look out, natural law says competition is the way of it, right? Everything's competing at all times. It makes us better, not weaker, right? So education has been competition free for too long. I think you solve this real easy. I mean, there's lots to be done, but here's the first thing I would do. let's say right now, and it's an atrocious number, but let's say that the average is $20,000 per pupil per year just to go to elementary school, which is pretty close to right on average. Great. So you take a family of four, you hand them a check for $80,000 and you say, you have to spend this on your kid's education, but if there's any left over, you get to keep it. You'll find all these schools popping up all over the place, suddenly saying, I don't need a superintendent of DEI and a sub administrator and a $60 million like football stadium because you're, not even Div 3 capable children, need a SMU quality stadium to play football at night, right? They do it for cheap, one room schoolhouse, but they're getting better results, right? You will find the cost of education come way down really quickly as they have to compete, and you'll find the quality of the outcomes go up because that's how parents are going to be selecting, right? That's it. Incentives and competition. That alone, I think, is going to do great because we homeschooled all our kids and they came out great, right? And we did it while paying taxes so other people's precious snowflakes could get $20,000 a year educations, and our kids turned out better. And it almost cost zero compared to that. You take that equivalent, basically the equivalent of a homeschool education, but in a one-room schoolhouse again, all different ages, right? That's the magic of that. We have this stupid education system. It's like you're going to be slotted with people exactly your age, plus or minus 6 months, and you're going to stay with them for 12 years. And then we're going to throw you out in a world where you have to be up against people of all different ages and abilities. It's crazy. So in homeschooling, you put them all in one room together, 6-year-olds, 18-year-olds, but they're now comparing themselves to each other. They're now mentoring back down the chain of people who they can mentor. It's just life again. It works great. So that's what I would do to fix all of this is competition. And then the second thing is, if I had my phone with me, I would hold it up and say, look, you don't need to know information anymore. It's all there. You need to know how to think. And by the way, when I asked Brett Weinstein in an interview a while ago, I said, when did you know things were going bad at Evergreen State? So for people who don't know who he is, he was one of two teachers with his wife, Heather Haying. They were at Evergreen State, and they had this mob turn against him because he dared to suggest something really crazy, which is, that we shouldn't differentiate based on skin color. Maybe it should be more about like who a person is. And that incited the mob, and they had to leave. So I asked him, when did you know that was going bad, though? He said, honestly, it was 3 years earlier. He gets called into the provost's office, and the provost said, hey, it's come to our attention that some kids are uncomfortable in your class, He's like, well, why are they uncomfortable? Well, because, you're really challenging them. He said, since Socrates, we've understood that you have to, that's called learning. Right? It's just like, I want big muscles, but I don't want to actually experience any of that discomfort at the gym. Like, well, then you can't have it. Brain is the same thing. When somebody's uncomfortable, that means you're actively engaging the learning process. And the kids were demanding, we don't want to be uncomfortable anymore. And the provost was saying, don't do that. And Brett was saying, well, then we're not educating anymore. What are we doing? We're warehousing them. We're coddling them for a while. We're delaying their adulthood. What are we doing? So that's when it started to break down. Took 3 years till it finally broke, and here we are. So again, we would have to get back to the point of saying education is supposed to be challenging, rigorous. Nobody ever just like sort of fell into calculus and it sort of worked out, except for a couple of the savants in the story. It's hard work. If you want to be good at anything, it's hard work. We've lost that path. And as a parent, if you said, here's 20 grand per kid, and I had school age kids, and I was like, I can do it for 14 grand at this school. That's going to say no cell phones, no tablets, and we're going to work them to the bone. I'd be like, yeah, here you go. And I'll take the other 6, pocket that, call it a win. That's how I would fix it right away.
Yeah. Yeah. Final question. I'm sorry to keep you on here. You talk about the debt-based money system, and I'm a huge critic of the Fed and central banking. A lot of us who understand how that scam works knows how close it is to this energy, thing they got going, and it really has become a million pound anvil on people all around the world. If you had to change the debt-based money system to something else, swap it with something else, have you considered what that would be, and what would that look like? What would you say we could transition to, or completely swap out for our debt money based system?
This is such an important question. This is the heart of the beast. And I mentioned it before, right? For the love of money is the root of all evil. But when you have a corrupt system of money, that statement gets put on steroids. Okay. We have a corrupt system of money. And because of that, there's no way to administrate a set of rules to have a non-corrupt set of outcomes. Where we are today is 100% full stop because we have a corrupt system of money. And that's debt-based fiat money. Now, why is it corrupt? It's corrupt because a small group of unelected bureaucrats called the Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC, they just make decisions. They click on some keyboards. Trillions of dollars get created. And that's real currency that steals from everybody who already worked. Because when you and I, we're going to earn money, right? We got to get up out of bed, take our life, our precious life, and go out and perform real work. Okay. The banks don't have to do that. They just make that same substance out of thin air for nothing with no work. So that's corrupt at its core, right?
Yeah,
the Federal Reserve, every time it
yeah.
prints up money, is stealing from everybody with the hidden tax of inflation. And it's terrible. It's regressive. It harms poor people more than rich people, the whole nine yards. It's a corrupt system. So if I was going to wave my magic policy wand again, we would go back to honest money. Right now, I would call that gold. Maybe there's a Bitcoin sort of equivalent that we could run, but Bitcoin, I don't think scales appropriately for that to be the technology, but it could be digital as well. I'm open to that as a concept, but here's the one rule. No matter what it is, it can't be manufactured out of thin air by people. Because when they have that option, they will always print. It's never a good time to take any pains. It's an emergency. You have to take that decision making away from humans. So I'm really saying I'm pro sound money because I know people. They can't be trusted. So you have to take that away from them. The temptation is too great to debase the money. So if we had gold and that was it, you either have it or you don't. And people are like, well, the United States has 8,000 tons of gold. That's 261 million ounces. That's not even 1 ounce per person in this country. It's not enough, so we would have to get more. We don't have time, but I would invite all your readers, followers. We're discussing this at Peak Prosperity. You can find this elsewhere on Twitter. Hundreds and hundreds of tons of gold have been exfilled out of London into New York, and hundreds of tons are busy leaving the vaults of New York for points unknown. It's a huge story right now. It's really big. It's got me at my antennae are quivering on this one. But if I was going to do the right thing at this scale, I would create a sound money system. Because again, it's not perfect. People will still be raccoons and scoundrels and fraudsters. That's all true. But with a hard money system, it has limits that it imposes on people. And those are, they don't like them. They're painful. That's why Nixon went off the gold standard in August of 1971. It was just too hard. We wanted to have the war and not raise taxes. What do? So we went off the gold standard, and here we are 50 plus years later, and we're about to reap the consequences. That was a terrible decision. But debt-based fiat money is a terrible decision too. So that's the prescription. We have to get back to honest money. We'll figure that out eventually, but we now have a hope of actually having that conversation. Ron Paul, he was the rightest guy I know about all of this stuff. And I'm really excited to get there because we can't have a dishonest money system and expect good outcomes. You get USAID, you get Victoria Nuland, you get the Ukraine war. That's where you end up.
Thank you, sir, for joining us today. Pardon Shots, where can people follow you? Where can people go and keep up with your work and what you're doing right now? Let the audience know where we can find you.
Absolutely. Love to. So on Twitter, at Chris Martenson. My website is called Peak Prosperity. That's peakprosperity.com. And I have a subscription service there. I put out a lot of stuff for free, and also people who like to go a little deeper, come for the Chris, but stay for the community. We have thousands of people there, really smart. Nuclear engineers, financiers, homemakers, but we share one thing. We're curious, we have open minds, and I think today, Royce, the most important thing anybody can do is you have to surf this avalanche. You have to stay current. You have to understand where the puck is going, or it might even quantum transpose itself to new part of the ice because things are changing so fast. You have to understand what these changes are and not get locked into the past. I think information is power. So truth is power right now, and never more so than today.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate the time. We'll have to have you back on the show soon.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Always a good time with you. Thanks.
God bless, brother. Chris, thanks, man. That was great.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Wow, we covered some territory.
Yeah, we got over some stuff. You gotta look more into this. Next time I gotta ask you more about the ins and outs of this technology stuff. This anti-gravity propulsion shit. It's all real wonky, crazy stuff.
Yeah. I again, I'm struggling because I don't have any data I can go on. I don't have anything I can just.
Yeah, put your
I
hands on.
yeah.
Yeah,
You
you
know.
you think there's a chance that that the whole thing is a psyop? I mean, they had to have actually Commander Favor had to actually have chased the TikTok, right? I mean, the TikTok video is real, wouldn't you say? Or can we really know?
So I can't really know because it might look real,
Mhm.
but what if you have a division like I believe that those F-18 Hornet pilots are saying this showed up on my monitor, I saw it, it's real. I can't guarantee that there wasn't some DARPA Black Ops thing over on the side doing a Project Bluebeam hologram that these guys
Right,
were seeing.
right,
Like, what level is this psyop being run at?
right. No, no doubt, no doubt. And so Greer, you think Greer is kind of a grifter?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just made way too many of those. Tomorrow is coming soon. Hyperbolic. He very much loves the attention, and so hey, maybe they're using him as a useful cutout to I don't know,
Yeah.
but I don't spend time searching him out, listening to him anymore.
Yeah, yeah. No, I got it. I get it. Um, Thanks, man.
Oh man, this is
You're the
great.
best.
Hey, good catching up with you here.
Yeah, man.
I
We'll
got to have
talk
you on
soon,
my
man.
show because I got a bunch of questions in reverse. Like, what does it mean to live in such a blue state? And do you worry that it's going to catch on fire?
Please, any day, because I'm still in the thick of it, man. Like, and the craziest part is, this is the scary part. I'm not afraid of Democrats anymore. I'm not afraid of these liberal leftists anymore. Seriously, no. Who I'm
Yeah.
afraid of are these Norm Coleman, Tim Pawlenty, Lindsey Graham, Karl Rove type Republicans. These people are at the heart of the deal, and these people are so diabolical. They will
Yeah.
at any point in time sacrifice their own position to handicap any real progress. Like, even going for my problem in the 26, it ain't gonna be the Democrats and their salacious character attacks, or it's Royce White, has 3 baby mamas. That's not. I mean, all that shit is just window dressing. The real attack is like from within. And the problem with the Republican Party is it's a very militarized group of people, because there's so many people who are ex-military. So they're very organized in their controlled opposition. And it goes all the way from the RNC down to the individual BPOUs and caucus systems. It's like scary
Hmm.
shit. It shows you why it took so long for a Donald Trump, and why it needed to be a Donald Trump, because he was so popular that he was able to, like Eric said, he burst through that pruning sort of system that they had going. But they're going to reconfigure it. I mean, right now they're trying to figure out, how do we reweave neocon, republicanism over top of Donald Trump and wait him out? And that's what I think is the next fight politically. Is like, the neocons are sitting back right now going, okay, we got to ride this dude out. How do we best, like, keep a leash on him, and how do we smuggle our people in right next to him, and keep the neocon, Republican thing alive? So, it's these DeSantis, Nikki Haley people. They're everywhere. I mean, they're
So
not like
I got a story for you.
yeah,
And this is kind of an open line, so I'm going to be more cryptic than I might be on Signal.
yeah.
Um, so I was approached by someone who
Mhm.
explained to me, he said, because I did all that Trump investigation around Butler. He said, so that happened on a Saturday, right? That shooting, right? And then the Republican convention was on starting Monday. So this gentleman was down at that Republican convention, and it had the big arena hall, and it had this
Mhm.
press hall over to the side, different building. So he's in that building, and this guy comes up and he starts chatting him up. And this guy said he was really mad about something. He's like, "Why are you so mad?" This guy said, "Well, I was the complete producer for this show that's happening over there until 2 weeks ago. I was just yanked." Like he'd been producing this thing for over a year, right? Yanked. He said, that thing over there, that's supposed to be Trump's wake and Nikki Haley's coronation. That's what that's supposed to be.
Jesus.
Like, really? And then there was this other larger story about how J.D. Vance was approached by 3 people with names you'd recognized and sort of told that he shouldn't be in Butler on that day, so that if you watch later, there's an interview and they're like, what were you thinking, J.D., when this happened? He's like, he was in a restaurant with his family and then he hears about the shooting and all of a sudden it all clicked. He's like, he said, I panicked. I got my family up and we left, Like why would J.D. Vance, who wasn't even named as VP, why would he have like panicked and left at that moment? Like, why would he have suspected he was in danger? Because it all snapped into focus for him.
Yeah.
And so this gentleman told me as well, he said, watch what Trump just throws all this shit right in their faces. So at that convention, he looks over at one point because Nikki Haley spoke and he said, I don't even know who invited her. Right. So I was talking with another person. They're right behind Karl Rove at this thing. And Karl Rove, when he announces it's J.D. Vance, he's shaking with anger. Like they were just in the row behind him. This guy's like literally like just can't manage himself, right? It's like this huge betrayal. So the rest of the story is that Trump was given a list of people he could choose from before the shooting, said, I'm not doing that. The shooting happens, and then he picked J.D. Vance, who was absolutely not on their preferred list of VP. They needed another Pence-style piece of shit in there.
Yeah.
And so that's when everything went off the reservation. And so all of this, I'm hoping the next shock for our country is that they actually find out who was behind that shooting.
Yeah.
So Reginald Rowe just quit, and I'm pretty sure this involves a Shapiro, some local law enforcement. Like they didn't just leave that Pac-Man security perimeter defense.
Yeah.
Come
on. That's ridiculous.
Come on.
Yeah,
that defies
ridiculous.
Everything. But if they pull that Band-Aid off and say, because that's JFK, MLK, RFK kind of stuff, right? Like this is a law. These are who we're up against. They're nasty.
Yeah. Well, we
nasty
know they're out
people.
there. We know they're out there. We know they're nasty. The question is who are they? And I was hoping to see those JFK files sooner. I hope Donald Trump gets those released sooner than sooner than later.
Yeah.
That's going to be a good look into to see what's going on. The problem that I think with and this is my one criticism of Donald Trump is I actually think that he believes he's a good enough businessman to save the dollar empire, and that just isn't going to happen. And it can be detrimental to us for him to have that sort of ego about it. Now I think he's doing a lot of great things, but I think in the end he does believe that the dollar empire can be saved with a sort of Pax Americana, banner hanging over it. And it's just like, let the world be multipolar. Fine. I mean, it's just such a British academia idea. Like that's why I brought up McKinder to like, we need to make sure that the Eurasian world island is still in the sphere of influence of the West. It's like all that's to the benefit of Europe. And that should really be what the MAGA movement stands for. We're not Europe. I mean, you could really deduce the MAGA movement down to we aren't Europe. We're not Europeans, right? It's just like all of our foreign policy is Great Britain's foreign policy. We got a war with the Chinese. We got a war with Russia. We got war in the Middle East. This is all Great Britain's foreign policy. We need our own foreign policy. And the dollar, even the dollar itself, is a tool of that foreign policy in some effect. Kissinger's Atlanticist extraordinaire. It's like, you guys could have that shit. Let's just get off that and get to some new, fresh, and more efficient shit than that. But
this is where I'm not sure if Trump has it in him, because if you peel that just one more layer back, you get back to the Rothschilds, Jewish-controlled Zionist central banking system, and that is the ultimate axis of power.
Right.
I don't think he's going to take that on.
I don't think so either, and that's that's the part that's. You can't say. I mean, I said it. I've been saying it, which is why he didn't endorse me, which is why Laura Trump and the RNC didn't endorse me, which is why every time we got – and I knew 3 people that are in the Trump administration that are on Team Trump, like next to him, right? Like I could call
you
them
got
up.
like 40% against Klobuchar, didn't you?
With no help.
With no help.
With no
that
money.
Was astonishing.
with no
Congrats, by
money.
the way. That was
Thank
awesome.
you, man. That's
You're gonna
no,
get
it
it
was
next
good.
time. I know you are. I
Yeah,
know
yeah,
you are.
we're going against Tina in 20. Well, now it's not Tina in 26. Now it may be. I really, really pray that it ends up being Tim Waltz just for the entertainment value.
Yeah.
But I would love an Ilhan Omar, right? I would love an
Yep.
Ilhan Omar too. That'd be like what was I when I ran for Congress in 22. Now I get to actually square off against Ilhan, which is going to be a bloodbath because she's so manic in her energy. But
Yeah.
I would take a Peggy Flanagan. You know, that's the lieutenant governor here who famously wore the shirt "Protect Trans Kids" with the knife on it, right?
Oh,
And so I mean, you know, there's so many. It's a who's who of crazy, you know, liberals. The one that I would worry about would be Keith Ellison because Keith is radical, but he's a black man, and you know he presents a different obstacle than the others. But you know, we'll see. It's going to be somebody. But the real problem I'm going to have is the Republican Party. They already got their minions saying Royce was a bad candidate. You know, he lost by 15 points. It's like I gained 8 points on a sitting incumbent with no support. We gained 10 points. I mean, I've got more votes than anybody in
no,
history.
you're so
running for
well
Senate.
positioned for next time. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable. And by the way, this next primary is going to be a bloodbath. I'm hoping
Yeah.
for all incumbents, not just Democrats. But here's my prediction.
Mhm.
Because we've got some good inroads. Bobby is going to be looking at basically the equivalent of an HHS Twitter files, right? Dig back in. I guarantee you that if they haven't destroyed them yet, and the shredders must be working, there are documents, there are recordings, there are meeting notes that show that they knew that vaccines cause autism and they conspired to hide that from American families, right? When that comes out, every single Democrat who voted against his confirmation is now heavily exposed to. I mean, these tack ads write themselves.
Yeah,
They just do.
no doubt.
So you got that. But as well, people are going to start to realize these rhinos also not on our side. This is no longer left right. This is up down.
Yep.
You know, and
Yep.
you're on that up down axis. And I think people are just going to vote. I think this next time it's going to be astonishing what we get, unless they unleash another virus on us or give us a cyber pandemic or kill this current administration and blame it on Iran. So we have to attack Iran or whatever.
Yeah, that'd be
The
a
false
neocon
flags.
wet dream, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
My
there'll be an
man.
Iranian passport, you know,
Yeah.
in the debris.
Yeah, 7 of them perfectly preserved.
Yep. But we're all ready for that now. And I know our side isn't going to buy that shit, you know?
Yeah, no,
and then we have to decide who are we and what are we going to do if or when they attack us again like this.
Right.
But we haven't assigned appropriate blame yet to who's actually behind all this.
Right, no doubt. No doubt. But
Oh.
thanks, brother. I appreciate it, man.
All right.
Let me know when you want me to come do the Peak Prosperity, and we'll try and get you back on the show here soon, man, when you got some free time.
Yeah, I'll shoot you a DM or an email or something as soon as I get my schedule up because I want you on. We got to talk
Thanks,
about
bro.
this.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it, man.
All right.
Talk soon.
Thanks.
Have
Bye.
a good one. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the great Chris Martenson, another family and friends edition of Please Call Me Crazy. I hope you enjoyed that podcast as much as I did. I hope in a more last Renaissance mentality, like AJ Barker and I were talking about the other day, conversations like this become more commonplace, and that where humanity and civilization has come to is really thought about, explored, questioned, and answered by a broader swath of people. Does everybody have to be a scientist, a researcher, a historian, a philosopher, politician? No, obviously not. But it would do well for our entire society for us to raise the baseline of our intellectual curiosity and our our sense of self-worth in many ways. All right, because like I said before, consciousness is probably the greatest gift that we've been given, and a way to care for that consciousness is not to have a blissful ignorance, but to be almost maniacally focused on improving and refining our intelligence and our consciousness and the intellect as long as we have time to do so while we're here on this earth. So it just is a joy to me to have conversations like the one I just did with Chris. And you see, a lot of the same themes. and we didn't cross notes or cross reference before the podcast. Is a lot of the things that we're dealing with are somewhat obvious, and we're going to get to a place in this story as a story of humanity where the questions become much more complex and the answers even more so. But in many ways, we're not at that place right now. In many ways, this whole era of MAGA, of America First, of Donald Trump's rise in American politics, and now his second term in office, this sort of political shift that's happening in our country. This is a holdover from legacy institutions that have been around generations, and their corruption, their duplicitousness, uh, their their lies are becoming more obvious for everyone to see. And that's mainly what we're dealing with now. You talk about USAID, or even when we talked about energy, the petrodollar, the fiat currency system. These things aren't new. They're not novel. Now, what you find is that there are people few and far between that are willing to speak about these things with a full throat, and even furthermore challenge the actual institutions, challenge the actual levers of power. So that is a rarity. And Chris Martenson, for example, is somebody who put his money where his mouth is in his professional career, in his media career, if you want to call it that, or his information and educational career, and really stood in a breach and a gap during the COVID pandemic. And I would like to think of myself the same way in some respects. I'm definitely willing to challenge the establishment. I challenge the establishment of professional sports, which is the watering hole of this global corporate community. And I mean, that's, it's the bread and circus of a global corporate community. And it's also a way to manufacture consent, and a way to, spread misinformation and all sorts of other things. So, I challenge the status quo there. I challenge the status quo in my own neighborhood, in my own community. When George Floyd died, everybody wanted to talk about racism. I said, let's talk about the way the money works. We don't want to march to the police station. We're going to march to the Federal Reserve and talk about fiat currency. And then challenge the way that the Republican Party is structured here in Minnesota, and really on a national basis by supporting Donald Trump when a lot of Republicans here in the state of Minnesota thought he was too extreme. So they put their pom-poms on, and they put their MAGA hats on when they knew Donald Trump was going to win, but they weren't 2 years in front at the midterm saying Donald Trump and the America First movement is the way that we have to go. I remember being in a congressional district convention for CD5 when I attempted to run against Ilhan Omar, was defeated in a primary, Republican Party primary. I remember being in that congressional district convention, and I asked a simple question: are we the party of God? And the room was split. Times change. Only 2 short years later, year and a half later, I'd be in front of an entire statewide convention, and I'd go to a number of congressional district conventions on my campaign trail, and to have people respond in a very America First, very MAGA, very Donald Trump like energy, spirit. And so things are changing. And when Chris says for the first time that he's excited, I echo that sentiment. I'm excited as well. And I have more fight in me than ever. In the last week, Tina Smith, my would-be opponent in this 2026 Senate race, Minnesota U.S. Senate race, uh, uh, came out and said that she would not seek reelection in 2026, which puts all eyes on Minnesota again in 2026. I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving, and make no mistake about it, all eyes were on Minnesota here in 2024. It's because the question is, in these Democrat strongholds, in these deep blue states who have very, very big questions about election integrity, what ground can be gained? And we gained a lot of ground here in Minnesota. Now, one thing I want to address before we go is because Chris Martinson, he brought up Brett, and Brett's brother is Eric Weinstein, and Eric Weinstein has his infamous clip where he talked about the powers that be not allowing Donald Trump to win. and him being concerned that they wouldn't allow Donald Trump to win, that the political powers that be have created a sort of mechanism where they prune the primaries, the two-party primaries for the populist candidates, myself being one of them, but many others across time. And so I want to bring something up here that I think is interesting, and I want people to understand going into this 2026 midterm. The controlled opposition will never be greater than it's going to be now because we won. And they're going to take on many different shapes and sizes. They're going to put on many different hats. They're going to wear many faces. But I guarantee you the controlled opposition will never be greater than it's going to be right here in this midterm, which makes this probably the most important midterm election in the history of the United States of America. And I would say Donald Trump winning is probably the greatest political comeback for an individual and in politics, maybe in the history of human civilization. Um, but because of that, everything has a consequence, and the consequence of such a great victory is the retaliation, the punchback, the kickback is going to be great as well. And for example, right now I'm seeing it all across X. Tina Smith says that she's not running for reelection, and I go right in under her post with a picture of myself and RFK and say Royce White for U.S. Senate, Minnesota 2026. And there's all this support. And what I need people to understand is there is a MAGA base, there is a Donald Trump base, which has now become the broad, the majority of that Republican base. And we're going to keep going into the caucuses. I can't stress it enough. If you're a Donald Trump supporter, if you're a MAGA supporter, you're America First to your core, you need to go into the party. Because the one thing you'll start to notice is that the Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley sort of echelon of America First actors, I call them actors. They're not really America First. They're America First light. I'd actually say they're more America First ish. They're just acting like they are really. But you'll see that these people are very coordinated. They're organized. Their responses, their echo chambers, their comments and replies on social media are very, very organized, very coordinated, and also very committed. And these people are not MAGA. They're just not. And I give you an example. I bring it back to Dustin Grady, who's become, I don't know, relatively big voice in Minnesota Republican politics. The shit freaks me out, actually concerns me that people like this are even taken seriously, but somehow they are. Go back to my debate with Dustin Grady, and I'm going to run it on my X until the cows come home because it perfectly paints the picture of where this country is, and even more importantly, where the Republican Party is as the sort of duty-bound entity to carry this America First and MAGA movement forward into the future. The debate, just lays everything out clear. Here you have some people in the party, in the Republican Party, who will, you know, just brag about their history in the party, their origins. I was a 21-year-old kid, and I was following Ron Paul, and that's Dustin Grady. I was an original Ron Paul guy, and as soon as I go to ask him about a pertinent issue, about a sort of nuts and bolts geopolitical issue like the Ukraine war, for example, Chris Martenson and I just talked about, he immediately shills for the media establishment sort of narrative on the war. And he did. He said Russia attacked Ukraine first, unprovoked. And Ron DeSantis was on the record saying the same thing. And we know Nikki Haley wants a war with Russia so bad she can barely, keep her legs crossed, right? I mean, she's just itching, dying for a war with Russia because that's the neocon modus operandi. And, that's the neocon mentality. That's their agenda. Their agenda is war. And here's the issue with it. It's not just that these wars are scandalous and that they're big, money grabs. But the real issue is that our opponents, our geopolitical opponents, you could say, our national mortal enemies, if you will, like a China, China is going to beat us in the long run because China's business is business. That's what Chris was explaining in the podcast, where China's going to South America and they're offering to build roads and they're offering clean water and they're offering, skills and all these other things that people, at least are somewhat grateful for, that in some way improve people's lives or at least bring them closer to a modernity that China could then use to be tyrannical with. That is what China's ultimate goal is, because they give their own people similar things in China, but it doesn't stop the tyranny. But nonetheless, the point is that the Chinese, the CCP's business is business. America's business is war, and that's a problem. And that's why these neocons are a problem, and that's why the Dustin Grages are a problem, and that's why the Ron DeSantis's and the Nikki Haley's are a problem. That's why the Karl Roves are a problem, and the Bushes is. They believe in this kind of shoot 'em up cowboy gunslinging Western ethos that really just ends in people around the world resenting us. And do we have to care about what everybody else thinks, of America around the world? No. But you do when you want to be international politics, when you want to be, sort of a global stabilizing force or police. The number one thing that a police department is well to do in their community is to go out and become familiar with the community, as familiar as they can. Even if that gives them a better vantage into, where are the bad pockets? What places do we need to be watching? You can't do that unless you get an actual accounting of the place that you're residing over or presiding over, which is why it would be smarter for us to shrink what we preside over so we can have a better vantage on where the dangers are, where the threats are. It's hard to watch all the threats when you're king of the whole world, so to speak. So the neocon mentality is a globalist mentality. It's just a war-like globalist mentality, and it uses people's fear about national security and their own safety against them. And they make you pay. And that's why, neocon Bill Kristol can be found right there in the ledgers of USAID, taking money to forward warmongering narratives. But that's it for us. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Chris Martenson. I hope you enjoyed the interview last Friday with the great Stephen K. Bannon. And we'll see you on Wednesday with another reaction episode here on Please Call Me Crazy. I appreciate your viewership and listenership today and in the future. If you get a chance, tiregit.com, promo code FPR. You get 3% off your final purchase on your tires. Go to freepeopleradio.com. freepeopleradio.store, where you can get merchandise for the podcast or from the podcast and support the movement that way. That's it for me. The fight continues. God bless America. Godspeed. The people are coming. Everything's up on the bar. We're all in. We get to decide. Do you want to live on your knees, or do you want to die on your feet fighting? That's the decision you get to make now.